Sending data. So restream.io will take care of the... Huh. Well, let me just open chat. Put that over here. Whoa.
Department and the Biden.
Okay, looks like I am live on YouTube now. Whoa.
Department and the Biden.
All right. Let me pop out this chat as well, and I'll just run those. Okay. All right, let me see what my sound is at. All right. Let me pop out this chat as well, and I'll just run those. Okay. All right, let me see what my sound is at. Okay, that's really soft, honestly. Maybe I'll just boost my mic a little bit. Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, as long as it's not clipping. Okay, if I talk like this and I stay in the yellow, I should be good. Maybe I'll just boost the... All right, that's way too long. Okay. So, it's been a while. Okay, if I talk like this and I stay in the yellow, I should be good. All right. I'm thinking if I want to make this a segment or if I want to... The question I'm grappling with is, do I play video games and see if any of the old regulars join? I don't know that I want to make a segment that is this scuffed. So yeah, if I'm going to make a video for this, I might as well just use my iPhone because it's better tech than what I'm working with. Like my Yeti's over here and it's just absorbing a bunch of the sound. So I might as well just use my iPhone to record video because it's better video quality. Let me see what it looks like in 1080. Oh wow, no, it looks terrible. Yeah, I think I just need to retire this webcam for cam-focused streaming, but okay. Let's do gaming. All right. Main problem here is I don't have, I don't like my, you know what, let's, okay. You know what, fuck it, let's do this. Trans rights and Congress. Let's actually keep it as it was. Let's do this. It's been a while. You can tell because the chat is completely empty because obviously no one watches my stream because I don't stream anymore. So I've decided to take on a little bit more content in the coming years. Obviously, this has a lot to do with the election result. In an unexpectedly decisive election, Trump was elected for 4 additional years. It wasn't actually... It was closer than it seemed because he was ahead the whole time. The Red Mirage kind of held. So it was just like consistently ahead, which made it seem very decisive. And I think the part of it that was really surprising is that he won with a lot of constituencies that were not expected to swing for him, and that it was expected to be close with his base rather than a pretty heavy swing in his favor in a lot of places where Democratic base turnout was severely suppressed for a various number of reasons. And then also just a lot of lower propensity, lower engagement voters who don't necessarily vote hardline on issues also kind of broke for him. But overall it seemed to reflect the polls, but the polls seemed to indicate at a very close election that if he won wouldn't be decided for a week or two, but he had it locked up pretty much late Tuesday night. Which sucks. It really does suck. I think there's a litany of issues that contributed to this. I'm not here to do post-game, but I think what we really need is an alternative to legacy media. We need an alternative to what the media landscape currently is providing us, and we need an alternative to what the right-wing insurgent alternative to that is. Because a lot of people are turning away from mainstream media sources for a lot of really good reasons, which is that most of them really, really do suck. And I think that's particularly shown in the way they cover the way they covered the 2020 primary, the rise of left populism between 2016 and 2020. But also, like, I think it's been particularly accented in the way that they've covered the war in Gaza, which countless scholars and the people that we trust to write the word genocide in our history books have said basically this is a genocide occurring, and mainstream media does not give the same respect to experts on wars and human rights atrocities and war crimes and genocide to what is happening in Gaza that they have with pretty much everything, including like the war in Ukraine, which, by the way, like Ukraine defending itself against an occupying force, completely righteous. We should be supporting that. But the double standard between how we cover that war and how we cover the absolute travesty that is happening in Palestine is apparent. Not to mention there is a crusade going on against content creators on this website, if you're watching on Twitch. Most of whom, in fact all of whom, look exactly like, not exactly, but look very similar to how I do in terms of skin color and complexion. And there is a online harassment and bombardment campaign trying to get left voices deplatformed because they advocate for human rights halfway across the world. So that's those are all things that are happening, and I don't know what role I could or should play in combating that right-wing turn, particularly in men and in young men, disenfranchised men who have grown up maybe largely on the internet, or maybe even haven't, right? I think that men of all levels of social and personal success in terms of, like, you know, whether it's, if we're going to go to juvenile high school metaphors, whether it's the quarterback or the nerd, they both have reasons to feel aggrieved, one of whom feels entitled to his power and the other of whom feels promised power and never received it. I don't want to get into like weirdly psychoanalyzing based on like American high school films. But those do speak to a certain social psyche in American men and in men all around the world. And I think men need better role models. I think masculinity needs close examination without kind of an attempt to force people to reject the concept of you have a gender and your gender assigns you a role to play in society. That even if you are an abolitionist for gender roles, like I would say largely I am, that at the end of the day we live in a society, and we are people assigned to roles. Sorry, I'm just checking if there's anything in my chat. I'm just going to move this over. We're people assigned to roles based on social identity markers, and we are grown up internalizing those roles. And I think men are no exception to that. And so trying to just tell men not to exist as men is probably counterproductive, even though that may be the end result of what I want. But like, men deserve positive masculinity role models, and I don't know if that's something I could provide, but someone needs to provide it. And there needs to be an overhaul of the way that the left present ourselves, the way that progressive voices present ourselves. Not necessarily in changing what people who are on the platform are doing now, but diversifying what that platform looks like. That there needs... So the way I would put it is, the problem is not that men need to take up more space in left media spaces. The problem is that there is a space in media that will always be occupied by and reserved for men because of the societal power that we have. We have the institutional power to occupy a certain bulk, a certain plurality of space in media. And by limiting the kinds of voices that we feel should be talking as generally as left-leaning, as progressive, masculine people, especially like cis masculine, like cis men, our instinct is always to say, well, I don't really feel the need, especially because, left-leaning men tend to be more secure in their masculinity. They also tend to need that space less. So like we tend to go out and think, I don't really need everyone to hear what the fuck I have to say. Even if what I have to say I think is really valuable, I think it's just more valuable to have different voices that are not usually listened to occupying that space. And I think that's important. It's really good. But at the same time, where those voices will reach is inherently limited by misogyny and transphobia and a racism that's endemic to the system, right? So I think there just need to be more voices out in more spaces, permeating into more areas. I don't know what role I have to play in that, but today I just decided, you know what, let's turn on the stream, see what happens. I do have something to talk about, though, which is there have been a lot of takes about what happened in the election. Most of them probably pretty bad, just because that's how takes work. Some of them good. Some of them, I don't know about it. I've probably had takes that were all along that spectrum. Let's start from the beginning. So let's talk about and I have to pull up a separate, remark, obviously. And let's go from this Aaron Reed quote. So I'm going to pull out this, whatchamacallit. And we're going to go ahead and look at some media. So, reputed former failed I don't even know if I can call him a failed presidential candidate, because like, don't you have to like make it to a primary to really consider to really be considered failed? So bad he didn't even have the chance to fail. Presidential candidate and noted Democratic establishment ghoul, Seth Moulton, decided he needed to get involved in the conversation. Obviously, you're reading what I'm reading here, but let's pull this up. Yes, so his name's cropped out because this stream is scuffed, but I don't care. In a New York Times article last week, I shared my belief that our party has no problem preaching down to those we disagree with, but a serious problem having real, honest conversations about tough issues. I shared several examples with the reporter, including my authentic concerns about transgender women participating in competitive athletics. Unfortunately, the backlash has only served to reinforce my original point. Now, I'm going to pause here, and I really do want people to notice one thing, which is the way that Democratic legislators and party insiders have come out constantly saying the thing that we need to learn from this is that we need to listen more as a party. We need to listen more as a party. And notice how when they say that, everything they have to say afterward and every reaction they have to the backlash is them saying we need to listen more, but then everything they have to say after is no, you need to listen more to me. Understand the bait and switch, the complete switch up of what they're saying versus what they're trying to do. They're saying that we need to, by we, I mean, like, they are saying that the Democratic Party needs to listen more to the people that disagree with it. But then when they, as Democratic Party insiders, express ghoulish views and then get called out for it by just, like, regular people, obviously on Twitter, but, like, on various other platforms, I'm sure, this fucking asshole's on Facebook, and he's getting near ratioed on Facebook of all places, where all the boomers go. I'm 31. I'm not on Facebook. But like, my point is, like, notice how they say we need to listen, and then all they do is preach and expect you to listen to them, right? It's a complete. There is no correlation between what they're preaching and what they're preaching, right? They say, literally, I shared my belief that our party has no problem preaching down to those we disagree with. Then he spends the rest of the post preaching down to people who disagree with them. The many conversations I've had since that article published fall in three categories. First, there are conversations that give me hope for the path forward. Many, including numerous leaders within, have offered thoughtful, constructive feedback. Some others have disagreed. I've learned from each of these conversations. Notice he is still doubling down on everything that he said as a postmortem, which has only served to reinforce my original point. Second are the huge number of calls and texts. And okay, fine, I didn't come all the way here to listen to you jerk yourself off. Last are those who have made no effort to engage constructively and instead took directly to social media. They condemned not just my ideas, but denounced even having this debate, some calling on me to resign simply because I have an opinion that differs from theirs. One, if you are an elected official, there are always going to be people who call on you to resign simply because you have an opinion that differs from theirs. It's politics. If people have an opinion different from yours, they're not going to want you in a position of political power. That's what politics is, all right? So let's table that. This is the wing of our party that pushes people away and makes them fearful to speak up. I would say that the wing of our party that tells trans people 10 years after the bathroom bill era was considered settled, where the Supreme Court literally said, actually no, I'm mixing my Supreme Court was talking about voter ID. It was the same. It all happened in North Carolina at the same time. But bathroom bills a decade ago were struck down. As a party, we were past this. The wing of our party that's now trying to bring that back and bring back bathroom segregation, literally attempting to impose separate but equal on the trans community, they're the ones pushing people away, which was demonstrated by the youth turnout in this election, and is making them fearful not just to speak up, but to exist as they are in society. You will be condemned and you will be denounced if you say that people of color need to use different bathrooms than white people. if you say that people from a lower socioeconomic class need to be relegated to like poor people's restrooms, when you come out in favor of segregation, when you come out in favor of curtailing rights that in this party at least were settled a decade ago, you are going to be condemned, you're going to be denounced. That is how things should be. You don't get to disagree on people's rights and get away with it without getting criticized. And that's exactly what Seth Moulton is. I'm sorry, I'm going to bring back this word, especially for people like this who decide to weaponize gender against people who are at active threat. Seth Moulton is being a little bitch about getting criticized for basically wanting to bully trans people back into the closet. This is what this entire experiment is about. And even if Seth Moulton doesn't have the spine to admit that that is what this is about, even if he doesn't understand that that is what this is about, because he's a useful idiot who's being manipulated on some very, very bullshit claims that trans people are somehow a threat to women in restrooms, something that is statistically not supported in the slightest. If you look at it in terms of prison statistics, if you look at it in terms of bathroom statistics, every single stat shows that trans women are not in any way statistically significantly a threat to women, to cis women in restrooms. But in places where trans women are forced to use the men's restroom, that has led to a precipitous uptick in violence against the trans community. This is settled. So when Seth Moulton decides to whine over so when Seth Moulton getting a little heated. Okay. So when Seth Moulton decides to whine about trans women participating in competitive athletics, this is what he is being a portal for. This is what he is being a gateway for. There is no, like, there is no talking about the competitive athletics issue without it inevitably leading to the bathroom issue. It is an opening point. It is a gateway drug. That is the entire function of talking about sports. You know why? And the way that you know it is that the people who talk about sports don't give a fuck about women's sports until trans women get involved. You will never, ever, ever see one of these Republican Congress people, any one of these Republicans, show up at like a Gotham soccer game. Like, it's never going to happen. And the things that they choose to care about are so statistically irrelevant. They can point to examples of trans women having a competitive advantage against cis women, which in many cases is probably true. And in some cases is probably unfair, and that those leagues will probably have to like impose or study or consider imposing a minimum transition duration in order to soften that advantage or something. But that is something that those leagues may be capable of doing. It may be something that we should consider. It may be something we shouldn't consider until the leagues actually, you know what, just let trans women compete. And that there is that there are better ways to make sure that social identity labels are not being like falsely claimed by cis men. Something that's pretty easy to catch, to be perfectly honest. Because also, people who pretend to have social identities are really bad at faking it, because it turns out when you don't actually have the lived experience of that identity, it makes it really tough to sell. So like, but I digress. It's not a real issue, right? What is a real issue is the ability for trans people to be socialized effectively into society, for them to be represented on the world stage, for them to be represented in media, for them to be represented in art, and yes, for them to be represented in athletics, not in their own separate but equal category, but in athletics. Now, does that mean that like every league needs to let every woman who's been like on estrogen for like 4 weeks compete immediately, even if that person like was an Olympic swimmer? Like, no, that's not. But that's not a thing that's happening. That's literally not happening. Most of these cases are women who have been on estrogen for multiple years, because as it turns out, when you're in the beginning of your gender transition, you're not really worrying about being a competitive athlete. You have bigger problems in your life. And every now and then there are women who have been on estrogen, on hormone replacement therapy for a certain amount of time. Their body is massively weakened. By the way, estrogen massively physically weakens you very, very early on. So even if you still maintain some level of a competitive advantage, it's drastically reduced, and you've given up the vast majority of the strength that you had as someone who has undergone like a male hormone wash, undergone male puberty. So then we come to the question of, but what happens if, but you still have a competitive advantage. You still have a physical competitive advantage that is the cause, that is a function of your birth and a function of the puberty you went through. Then the question becomes, how is that different from a 6'11" basketball player, or a swimmer, an Olympic swimmer who's the greatest of all time simply because he has a supernatural lung capacity, like Michael Phelps? How is that different from, how is that different from any genetic advantage that a person has who just happened to be socialized and assigned the same biological sex at birth? It's not. Well, no, the difference is obviously there is a gender transition. But like, I think that we can reasonably conclude that someone doesn't give up 75% of their bodily strength advantage as a member of that sex just so that they can switch categories and have a slight competitive edge, all the while basically resigning themselves to an entire lifetime of like passive and active social marginalization, discrimination, and persecution in every fucking corner of the world they go to, just so that they can have a slightly better chance of getting a silver medal instead of a 4th place finish. Like, it's not a thing that's happening. What's more important is socializing trans people into society. That's just what's more important. Now, and the other thing is, if you really want to neutralize the advantage that adult trans women have in women's sport categories, then the solution is what said trans people want, which is they want to be able to transition earlier. Every person who transitioned in adulthood wishes that they'd had the opportunity to do it earlier. So, I mean, I can't say every single person. I'm sure there's someone out there. But, like, the vast majority of trans health, not the vast majority, like universally, all of trans health is improved by earlier transition. And also, when you're able to transition such that you're able to go through the puberty of the gender you are meant to be, what happens to your physical strength? It falls perfectly in line with your chosen gender. Maybe small, slight changes? I don't know. I don't know how puberty blockers work. But these are the same people who want to ban the puberty blockers, right? So there's no good faith around this conversation. Even if there was a good faith conversation to be had, it cannot be had. So anyone who engages in it is either being a useful idiot or they are a transphobe. Seth Moulton, maybe a bit of both. I think probably he's just a useful idiot. He's also a piece of shit who wants to blame the electoral failures of the Democratic Party on the outsiders because his job as an insider depends upon it. And this is another aside. My asides are not going away. I go on tangents all the time. But this is another aside, is that every time you hear someone in a position of power in the Democratic Party criticize someone outside of a position of power in the Democratic Party, it is specifically because the entire Democratic Party power structure is designed around a very, very toxic cycle of insiders get the jobs on campaigns. When they win, they get the jobs in the staff and the administration. When they lose, they all get each other cushy jobs at MSNBC doing various media punditry, whatever, think tanks, nonprofits, what have you. And they get to go and work in their little firms and their little think tanks at their whatever media outfit is going to hire them as a contributor. And then the time comes to campaign. They get all the campaign jobs. Win or lose, they're set. They're set. Because everyone knows each other. It's a small club, and you ain't a part of it, right? The entire Democratic Party power structure depends upon these guys staying on the inside. Because if they leave the positions of power, the people who are funding their campaigns and also giving them jobs when they're out of power, because the people who fund their campaigns don't care whether these guys or Republicans are in power, because both are good for them. What they care about is that the insurgent Democrats are not. That populist Democrats who are not funded. I'm not talking about progressives. I'm not talking about the left. I am talking about Democrats who are not funded by corporate donors, by corporate media, corporate media is owned by corporate donors, that's why. Who are not owned by the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks of the world, right? And I don't want to say owned. I'll soften my rhetoric a bit. Who are very, very deeply funded and have a massive financial incentive to do the bidding of the Jeff Bezoses of the world. When those people who are not at the behest of the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world, when they get into power in the Democratic Party, then the insiders who are getting funded become useless, right? So the insiders have to protect themselves against the progressive insurgents. They have to protect themselves against any insurgents because their jobs depend on it. Their jobs don't depend on winning elections because they will be fine either way. They are paid to be... The controlled opposition is a strong word because controlled opposition implies that opposition doesn't want to win. But they are paid to be a tempered opposition. And that is what the incentive structure looks like. So look out for all these guys. Anytime someone's criticizing someone outside of the Democratic Party for the failures of the Democratic Party, that is something that you should be suspicious of. This election has made it clear that Democrats are seen as being out of touch on a variety of cultural and economic issues. And we cannot protect trans rights and so many other things if we don't start winning elections. You can't win the majority if you ignore their views. This is the part that makes me think that Seth Moulton is just a moron. Which, by the way, I think most insider Democrats are. I think to some extent you have to drink the Kool-Aid in order to sell it. I think there's a few... obviously, there are Democrats who I think are just full-on sociopaths. I would say, Richie Torres is just a sociopath, right? Richie Torres is just a piece of shit who will break bread with literally anyone, including defending literal neo-Nazis. He defended fucking Elon Musk, who has full-on retweeted and replied, "You have said the actual truth," to full-blown neo-Nazi conspiracy theories, right? Richie Torres doesn't believe a fucking thing. I think Seth Moulton drinks the Kool-Aid, you know? And a lot of these Democrats do. A lot of these Democrats are just kind of too dumb to understand that, let me just see if... Yeah, the text got cut off a little bit. That's okay. Maybe this will work? Did that work? No, that did not work. Just made it smaller. Oh, it just made it... Yeah. Sorry. Technical difficulties. Yeah, we'll just fix the... Let me just fix the crop on it. Let's do 100. Yeah, let's fix this now. And then on the bottom, we'll say 150. Yeah, that's fine. Honestly, yeah, that's fine. All right, we'll see as it goes. This is so scuffed, sorry. So what Seth Moulton doesn't understand is that The political war is not just a debate on the issues. It's a debate over the frame of the issues. That is what, and I think that non-populists simply are incapable of understanding this, is that you cannot just have a debate over should women be the chattel of the United States government or should they not be the chattel of the United States government. The point is that when you're debating, when you are at the point where you're debating whether misogyny is good or bad, you have lost the framing war. Because what you are doing is you are conceding every step up until that point, which is the idea that various cultural wins for gender equality are the reason that any of the problems that Americans are facing are problems to begin with. We don't just randomly quantum shift back in terms of the way that we look at each other as a society. We don't just start becoming more racist and becoming more sexist magically. What happens is real economic material outcomes for Americans become bad enough that they start looking for something to blame. And when you put people in dire, desperate situations, their values start to become malleable. This is what the impoverishment of Americans looks like. This is why the truth is, and it's to put it really simply, the cost of living made Americans more racist and sexist. That's just how it is. Like, if you go out in Queens, this is exactly what AOC did. This is exactly what Zohran for mayor, by the way, did, which was go out and talk to people in Queens, in Brooklyn, not in Brooklyn because they represent Queens, in Queens and Manhattan, who voted for Trump, who have never ever voted Republican in their lives, right? And obviously there was a huge contingent of South Asian and Middle Eastern Americans who didn't necessarily vote for Trump. Some of them did, but who refused to vote for Kamala Harris because of a genocide happening in Gaza. But and if you have a problem with me saying the term genocide, take it up with all of the scholars who call it a genocide. I'm just going by their cue. I'm not qualified to judge what's a genocide. I go by the genocide scholars. But all of them were citing the cost of living is getting too high. And I don't know, we had 4 years of Biden and it's continued going up. Initially, they said it was COVID, but it hasn't stopped going up. And notwithstanding whether the issue itself that they have is fully true, whether, inflation has been falling or whether, crime has gone down, which crime has gone down. But the xenophobia stems from material pressure. You're not going to be able to debate people out of whatever markers are whatever markers are fixing them to the notion that things are worse now than they were 4 years ago. And if you're trying to tell people, no, you were really worse off 4 years ago by talking to them about COVID, what are you doing here? Are you trying to get them to work towards something that's going to improve their lives? Or are you here to debate that what they're going through right now is not as bad as they think it is? Because they're not remembering how bad COVID was, which it's just a ridiculous messaging choice, The culture war is not about debating people on the issue. It's about fighting the framing. This is the thing that the Biden administration, this is the thing that the Democratic, the conventional wisdom of the whatever inner circle of the Democratic Party seems to be, doesn't comprehend, is that you will not win an election by putting forward a light fascistic immigration bill and then trying to campaign against Trump for pillaging that bill so he could win an election. Because he did that because he knew he could campaign on it. You're not going to beat the immigration candidate by conceding the immigration frame. It's not going to happen. Why, like, if you are going to validate people's suspicion that immigrants are stealing their jobs, why would they go for the party that's doing it half-assed? Why wouldn't they go for the guy who says, oh, I'm going to deport all of the, don't worry, it's just going to be the criminals. And then out the other side of his mouth, he says anyone who crosses the border illegally is a criminal. But it even gives undocumented people the ability, not that they're voting, but like it even gives undocumented people the ability to say, oh no, he's not going to deport me because I'm a law-abiding citizen. What he is doing is he is giving people plausible deniability to themselves so that they can go and vote for the person who makes them feel like things are going to improve. Democrats do not ever seem to care about making people feel like things are going to improve. They spend the entire time proselytizing and trying to convince you that you were wrong about the issue to begin with. It's not a winning strategy. And full mea culpa, like, I thought it was going to be. I thought that abortion was going to be a salient enough issue, but it turns out when the cost of living is high enough, like, white women don't even care about their rights. White women care less about their rights under economic pressure than sorry, I got distracted by the chat message. I'll respond to it in a second. When the economic pressure is on, white women care less about their rights than they do about taking away the rights of the people that they have been convinced is coming for them, you know? It is the intersectional layering of racism, economic disenfranchisement, and misogyny all on top of each other. All of these things are important, but the only way to fight that is to change the frame. You have to talk about how you are going to address the economic pressure. And you have to have an uncompromising on top of it narrative that you're wrong on the culture war. You can't partly concede the cultural issue while trying to fight the frame. Because if you're trying to fight the frame, you're undermining your own message by saying, oh, no, but we'll compromise with you on the culture war. No, you're wrong on the cultural issues. Trans people are people. Trans women are women. This is settled. The scientific community agrees with me. And quite frankly, like, just let people live how they want to live. And this is a frame that worked in 2022. This is a frame that worked from 2018 to 2022. Throughout the 2010s, every time the Republican Party came for trans rights, they came off as weird. It didn't work in Michigan. It barely worked in Virginia. And frankly, it didn't really work in Virginia. Virginia was about, God, I forgot. It was the CRT shit. But like, and it was also like just a statistical swing. This defied the statistics of the matter, especially if you ask Alan Lichtman, who I guess the keys got stuck. Why are college-educated affluent people telling working people that they were wrong about the economy? So the truth is, where the economy is a very complex question, because the way that we index the performance of the economy is on a broad scale, and we talk about like what the job situation is, what wages are like. And the truth is, like, overall, like, especially in coastal cities, wages are going up. Are they going up as fast as cost of living is? Maybe in some cases, maybe not in some cases. I have not paid enough attention to the cost of living particularly, and the rise in what rise there has been in real wage. The problem also is that, like, especially when it comes to wages increasing, it has been heavily fragmented between, one, where you are geographically. It has been heavily fragmented in the way that people are moving around the country. I think people are moving more around the country. That's just a vibe I get. That's also not based in data. The truth is that the economy has been getting better over the past 4 years in a broad macro sense. But still we have not addressed the basic problem, which is that people feel like they're having to spend more money as a percentage of what they make. Now, is that because the economy is worse on the metrics? Maybe, probably not though, right? So like, there are things that are not measured in economic statistics that are affecting working people. The amount of free time you feel like you have, the amount of free time you do have, Hell, the quality of entertainment might be in effect, right? How mental health is post-pandemic. For example, like if mental health is worse post-pandemic, then your ability to do all of the things that working people may have been doing 10 years ago in order to maintain some level of disposable income, in order to increase their level of, in order to increase their disposable income, such as, cooking, childcare, getting effective childcare. My point is that my factory working parents, the economy is worse. I've got a college degree and I'm doing fantastic. Yes, and that's a really important, like, the problem is that college educated affluent people think that, so there's obviously, an anecdote is not data. And I think people worship at the altar of data when they need to understand what the anecdote is, right? They need to understand what anecdata as an indication of outliers shows you, right? And every economics teacher would be the first one to tell you that, like, economic data is not the be-all end-all of measuring the health of an economy or a society. The most absurd example of this, by absurd I mean the kind of bringing this out to like a ridiculous extreme. GDP is not an indication of the health of an economy. It is one indicator of many aspects of health, right? And if GDP is decreasing, it's a necessary but insufficient, right? If GDP is decreasing, that's a problem, right? Negative economic growth is a problem. But it's not the only thing that you can point toward. Wages need to be increasing. And even if wages are increasing, they need to be increasing for everyone, right? And real wage, even real wage increasing across the board is not necessarily an indicator that the economy is doing well for everyone. Because if people don't have as much time to take care of their kids or to go to work, if people are spending longer hours at work, even in the middle class, say you have a salaried job and you're spending more time at work, you're making more money, but what else is happening, right? The cost of a fixed basket of goods might stay the same, but you're gonna have to eat out more. You're gonna have to get more expensive groceries that are for convenience. Any number of ways in which you are going to be spending more money that does not show up in a basic inflation equation, right? There are limitations to the ability of economics to measure political health, right? Or to measure the health of a country. Even the economic health of a country, right? And the truth is, you need to turn a little more to sociological indicators. You need to turn a little more to surveys. You need to turn a little bit more to understanding what people are doing on the ground, which is why like local politicians have a crucial role to play in this. And there needs to be a communication structure from the bottom up. My assembly member knows exactly why his constituents voted for him and for Trump. So does my congresswoman. My congresswoman knows because she asked. She asked her constituents, why is it that you voted for me? My congresswoman is AOC, by the way. Why is it that you voted for me and also for Trump? I want to know. And she gets answers. These are things that matter. None of that changes the fact that we live in a country that decided that the solution to its economic problem was to hate women, right? There are multiple ways that you can combat that. You can just scream, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Which, best of luck. Or you can shape the message differently. People hate me more. In the past year, I have been assaulted, accosted, and I don't think it is that my parents were crushed by globalism. That's why they like Trump. So, like, there is also a really important understanding of the way that globalization has panned out. Obviously, it's been very corporate help, but like this is part of the equation, right? But just because your parents were crushed by globalization doesn't mean that that is enough for them to sign on to, frankly, a despicable agenda, right? I don't think that it's necessarily true that your parents are racist or misogynist. Or at least, like, let's take older factory working, like Gen X to baby boomer people as an example, right? I think your values become malleable. Your values become mutable. They become subject to change when your survival is on the line. And when you feel like the person that dancing with the person that brung you is going to get you killed, you're going to change your values to adapt and survive. It's not that you change your values consciously, but the things that you thought you believed become less and less clear when you're worried about where your next rent payment or where your next mortgage payment is coming from, right? And yes, Trump can rail against NAFTA, he can rail against TPP, and he can talk about tariffs, right? And tariffs are a great example of a horrendous economic policy that will only hurt all of the people who have been harmed by NAFTA, because like the entire cost of those taxes are borne by the people who buy those goods. The tariffs are taxes on us, right? But you have to sell a narrative to get people to be okay with the monstrous shit that this incoming administration wants to and is going to attempt to do. And a lot of it's going to succeed. And yes, like, Democrats do not have a populist alternative. They have spent the past 8 years violently repressing and shutting down criticism of free trade agreements. Sorry if I'm staring you in a way you don't want to go. Welcome to the stream. You say anything in chat's gonna get me flying off the handle, not like flying off the track onto a different track that is going to take me in another direction that will be just as substantive and hopefully entertaining. Well, entertaining in as much as talking about economic policy is. You don't have to apologize for that. That is my personality defect, and frankly, it results in content. So, but yes, let's actually bring it back. I'm actually proud of myself for finishing my point before responding to your chat message. But we were talking about trans people, and we were talking about the culture war. What Democrats don't understand about the culture war, and I'm going to bring back Seth Moulton's little tirade. What Democrats don't understand about the culture war, to sum things up, is that you cannot fight and win on a frame that you have conceded. If you are going to concede the fact that women having gender parity in the workplace is a threat to the men, is what has contributed to the loss of economic success for the men, they are going to waver on their belief that women deserve equal rights, because they're going to be like, oh, well, I guess if I'm going to be poor and not be able to put food on the table, and then you're going to get into like the incel shit of like, well, not incel, but like the you're going to get into like the red pill, the men's rights shit of like, wait, how come women have equal rights in the workplace, but I'm still expected to provide for the family and all of that bullshit, right? Which, by the way, like, toxic masculinity is a weapon of capitalism, right? The pressure that men feel to provide for a family in an economy that pays them not expecting that they're going to be a sole income provider, right? They get the working class men get kind of the worst of both worlds on that front, specifically with regards to capitalism. And it makes them more sexist, right? because they think, like, I've experienced this. This is also anecdata, but like I've experienced this, which is like boomer, and this is a full-on cultural thing of boomer men, especially like South Asian, like in a South Asian family, boomer men who were raised in households where men were expected to submit to maternal authority, matriarchal authority. And they were taught that if they studied hard and they just submitted at home, that you get into a good school, you get a good job, and you're going to be the big honcho at a workplace. And I know men who are extremely economically well-to-do, but they are angry constantly because they work in workplaces where young women who are capable and bright are able to succeed just the same as they are. And those young women are able to have, like, well, it's probably optimistic to say as much power in the workplace, but like, you know, like places in professional STEM environments, engineering, in business, where young women are able to make careers. And by making careers, they gain like 40% of the power. That's optimistic, but 40% of the power in the workplace that said baby boomer men who have no power at home because their wife, my wife, runs the household, and they have to they feel like mistreated by their wives, they feel mistreated by their moms, they feel mistreated by their older sisters, or at least like authority wielded over them at home, and they think, how come I have no power at home and I don't have all the power at work? There's an imbalance there, right? And like that's kind of the cultural end of it. Now, do I think that what do I think is the solution to that? I have no idea. I obviously don't think that the solution is to give that man overbearing power in the workplace. I think ultimately, like, there's a sucks to suck where it's just like, sorry, like, you got the shitty end of a stick. Like, if you can't go to therapy and deal with it, then like that's just going to be your life, right? But when it comes to working class men, you have that dynamic. But filtered into it is the abject sense of inadequacy, a world that told you that you have to provide for your family, and then you work your ass off and you don't get the means to provide that, right? And if that is layered on top of that gendered resentment of, oh, I was raised by a mom who, beat my ass every day, but I was told that, like, I need to show up in the workplace and be the big honcho, and I don't feel like the big honcho, like, that'll make you insecure, right? A lot of men need to go to therapy, but no one can afford therapy because therapy is super expensive, Like, it's extremely fucked. And if we're going to do anything in politics, then it should be to focus on a message that alleviates economic pressure. Because the economic burden is the main thing that drives the cultural problems. But in order to do that, we have to gain power. But we can't gain power by ceding the cultural issues. By doing anything that suggests to working class voters, to ordinary voters who base their decisions on whose vibes are the most convincing. If I go to working class voters having basically acted in a way throughout my legislative career, acted in a way that says, well, maybe trans women are a threat to cis women in bathrooms. Maybe immigrants are coming to steal your jobs a little bit. And when I put forward an immigration bill restricting immigration to the same extent to 90 to 95% of the extent that a Trump legislation would have done, even if the means of doing that are marginally less draconian. When I put forward that bill, what I am saying to working class voters is that immigration is a real issue and the frame that Republicans are putting on it is correct. At which point those voters are going to say, well, then I'm going to go with the guy with the whole hog solution, It is the main problem with the Democratic Party is they want everyone to think that Trump is a fascistic threat, which Trump is a fascistic threat, but they don't do anything in their behavior to actually oppose and resist the fascistic things he says and does. They're conceding every frame and then saying he's a fascist for engaging in them. Trans rights are unpopular with so many groups, blacks and Hispanics. Yeah, but political will is an important thing here. the political will to oppose trans rights is directly linked to how much you think how much you are convinced to believe that the enfranchisement of transgender people is linked to your disenfranchisement, right? You are being given someone to hate in a time where you need someone to hate. And the truth is, I don't think people vote. Let me think about this actually. Yeah, no, I'm gonna need to see data that anti-trans advocacy played a significant role in swinging this election for Trump. Because the truth is, the bulk of, and this is also anecdotal, but the bulk of anti-trans political ads that I saw were very clearly marketed toward the black community. In fact, every single Trump ad that was anti-trans was featured black content creators talking about how Kamala Harris wanted to give like gender reassignment surgery to trans inmates and stuff like that. Like it was the regular, like I don't know if it was Charlemagne the God. Charlemagne the God was like a Bernie guy in 2020, but like I don't know, he seems to have taken a turn. A couple of black pop culture leaders, or pop culture figures, were, it was just sound bites from them basically being like, Kamala Harris wants to give like gender reassignment surgery to like black inmates, or not black inmates, to just inmates, right? To trans inmates, sorry. And it was like super cringe, but also like I was like, is this gonna land with anyone? And if you look at the statistics, like there was one demographic that did not swing for Trump, that held pretty damn strong on its support for the Democratic candidate. And that was African Americans. The most seemingly susceptible group on trans rights held strong for the Democrat. You know? They lost because of the economy. Yes, that's true, but like we have to unpack it deeper than that, because the economy may have caused the culture war to be effective, but the culture war narrative was effective. Democrats can't reject the culture war by conceding the culture war issues, because the culture war issues only matter because of the problems in the economy. But then what happens is the Republicans are waging the culture war as a right-wing populist issue. So when you concede the culture war, what you're doing is you're conceding the right-wing narrative. When you say I am going to restrict immigration 85% as draconianly as, making up a word, as Trump would have, you are telling the voters immigration is the reason the economy is bad. And then when you do that, they will say, well, I'm going to vote for the guy who's going to go whole hog on the issue. Why would I vote for 85% when I get 100% of the solution, you know? So yes, the economy is why they lost, but it is not as direct line as that, you know? And it's important to say it's not as direct a line as that, because right now what Democrats are trying to do is they're trying to refocus the message by conceding all of the culture stuff. It would literally be like if Democrats had basically said, oh, all of the civil rights stuff is an electoral liability. Let's just hold back on fixing the immigration. Is part of the problem, though. Take Canada, for example. Our GDP figures are good, but our GDP per capita is in the tubes. That is not GDP per capita decreasing. Okay. So GDP per capita decreasing, obviously, is a function of population increase. But GDP per capita is not actually the indicator you need to be going for. What you're doing is you're applying a false correlation. Just because the population is greater and GDP per capita is down doesn't mean that that is the metric that is showing you what the problem in Canada is, right? You're over attributing importance to GDP per capita here. I'm not here to debate on whether immigration is or isn't part of the problem. Mainly because the people whose job it is to understand this stuff have said that immigration overall in the United States is a massive boon to the economy. It doesn't take away jobs from people who are actually losing those jobs, and that the jobs that are taken by immigration overwhelmingly tend to be jobs that were not getting filled anyway, or were in particularly higher demand. Now, is there a problem with attrition in terms of like, not attrition in terms of like people working jobs, but is there a problem with kind of the reverse, the job demand attrition, where like certain jobs that are very, very, very high demand suddenly drop off in demand and start getting laid off? I think tech has a problem with that, where tech will start hiring a bunch of people, and maybe that might start issuing like visas to people to work those jobs, and then what happens is like that job goes out of demand, and then like has to switch over to something, and it's really difficult to retrain people. So like, I don't know if there's a problem in the circulation and like the revolving door on that, but that's an economic infrastructure issue. Like that is a problem that is not going to be solved by restricting immigration, because like those jobs need to be filled, and then those jobs are gone, right? Like, to the extent that's a problem, I have no idea. But overall, like in terms of like low skill worker immigration, like those people aren't working jobs that anyone was trying to get to. Like, the problem in terms of jobs, as Cat Thrower said, is globalization. And it's technology rendering workers obsolete, which the natural transition of the United States from a manufacturing economy into a service economy. And we do not have the systems to understand that, like, you have got to provide for people who are not going to have marketable skills in the economy, which means you have to have a jobs guarantee. You literally have to put people to work in places doing things that the private sector does not demand. And the reason for that is not that, like, the reason for that is very simply that those people need to make income, and it's going to be really difficult to just cut them a check. And also, people want to feel like they're working, right? People want to work. I think people want to work for their paychecks. So, like, yeah, like, you need things like a federal jobs guarantee. I think it's not a safe assumption that all these immigrants are coming in to work jobs that aren't filled. I'm not making that as an assumption. I'm simply taking the cues on the people who study this stuff, because I'm not studied in this stuff. A lot of them are coming and are given government assistance, and a lot of them are living in substandard situations, working for the equivalent of a slave wage. The people who are working in substandard situations, working for the equivalent of a slave wage, I agree, is extremely inhumane, but it directly contradicts your narrative that they're drains on the economy. People who are working in substandard situations, working for the equivalent of a slave wage, those are people who don't have social security numbers and don't have government protection, which is why they're able to be exploited for that. If they're able to be exploited for their wages, then they're not actually receiving government assistance, because they would have to be in the system for that. In order to receive government assistance, you would also be under the protection of the government. This is not happening. Right? Like, if you have a social security number, you have access to the social safety net. You also have access to the protection of the government. You don't both not have an identity and have an identity. You're not both documented and undocumented. Like, undocumented people, like, if they are in those substandard situations being exploited for their wages, that's bad. And I think they should be brought into the system. I think they should be a bigger drain on the economy, because we can afford it. But this is not happening. You are talking about two directly contradictory scenarios. You're talking about the employer who takes an undocumented worker and basically says, if you go to the police, you're just going to be deported. And if you go to the government, you're just going to be deported. And all of those same identifying markers that will allow them not to be deported, that would allow them protection from an abusive employer, are the same things that are what they need to get government assistance. It's a bullshit narrative. It's a bullshit narrative that makes it very easy to oppose immigration for the wrong reason. Like, I'm not saying there are bad reasons. I'm not saying there aren't good reasons to oppose immigration. I probably don't agree with them, but I'm referring to Canada. Yeah, but I'm referring to the United States of America. So like I can't. I'm not going to debate you on Canada because like I don't. It's a fake country. Sorry, you're Canadian. You don't. Your country's not real. I see your country as an extension of Michigan, and just like we haven't quite colonized it yet. Okay. With that said, all of that is to lay the groundwork of, in my very roundabout way, it's extremely important. Last time you guys tried, we burned down your White House? Okay. That was pre-World War II, though, wasn't it? All that's to say that Democrats conceding the culture war narrative is not what is going to make us more economically populous. In fact, it's going to make us worse off in the economic war, because what we're doing is we are conceding the framing on what is to blame for our economic problems, in which case it's going to be impossible for us to win. Well, not impossible, way harder. So not winning the culture war, but creating an alternative narrative in the culture war, regardless of whether the positions are popular or unpopular on paper, is really important in affecting the political will of people who are opposed to things like trans rights and more immigration and women's rights and Roe v. Wade and like pro-basic abortion rights and women not having to bleed out in fucking parking lots. All of those things, the political will of the people who are for good things, as a Democrat, I believe in good things, and the political will of the people who are against those good things, and also the people in the middle whose opinion on those things is largely informed by the economy and how much they think each issue is related to that. That is determined by what we frame as important and what we frame as unimportant, and that which is being attacked as important that needs to be defended in order to frame those things as unimportant. So for example, trans people in bathrooms, right? In order to frame that as unimportant, we also have to fight against the hate being pushed, because we can't concede the issue without conceding the frame. So yes, it doesn't matter how popular letting trans people go to the bathroom of their gender is. One, because it's just the moral thing to fight for. But secondly, it doesn't matter how popular it is, because you're not fighting for a popular issue. You're fighting for an issue in the way that it affects the frame. We're not here yet. So that brings us to Nancy Mace. Before I open this, so I don't want to talk about, wait, hold on. Those ideas seem to be rejected by the electorate, though. Trump won the popular vote, lol. Again, we're not talking about the same thing here. We're not talking about how to win the issue. We're talking about how to frame the conversation so that people are voting based on what's important. Yes, the idea that 85% as draconian an immigration policy is better than 100% draconian immigration policy was rejected by the electorate. You're completely right. Trump won the popular vote when the conversation became about look how many Republicans are in our, look how many like less popular Republicans are in our coalition. Look how many how many immigration restrictions we can put on while still calling Trump a fascist. It was an internally contradictory narrative. Of course Trump won the popular vote, because we conceded every frame to him. And then tried to convince the country that no. Every bit of the logic that Republicans are pushing on you to get you to hate immigrants and black people and women and trans people, every one of those frames, we're not going to fight those. But then we're still going to try to convince you to vote for a black woman who's also trying to push herself to the right. The Dems traded RFK and Tulsi for Dick and Liz Cheney. That is a historical F-up. I would have loved for Dick and Liz Cheney to stay Republicans, RFK and Tulsi to go be Republicans, because RFK and Tulsi, well, RFK is a complicated freak, but no, Dick and Liz Cheney belong nowhere. Dick and Liz Cheney belong in, actually, I can't say it on Twitch or YouTube where I think Dick and Liz Cheney belong. I wouldn't say that about Liz Cheney, but Dick Cheney, no, here's what I can say on YouTube, which is Dick Cheney belongs in The Hague. He belongs in a prison cell for the rest of his life. Liz Cheney, probably not. By the way, Tulsi Gabbard is a fascistic freak who, like, I have been voted for Kamala. Who? Like Dick and Liz Cheney? Yes, Dick and Liz Cheney probably voted for Kamala, I guess. Yeah, probably. I don't care. I don't care who Dick and Liz Cheney voted for. I don't. Anyway. Yeah. Tulsi Gabbard was never really a Democrat. She rose to political prominence trying to get Obama to be more Islamophobic. Not trying to get Obama to be more Islamophobic. She rose to political prominence criticizing Obama for not being more Islamophobic. Tulsi Gabbard's a fuckhead. Tulsi Gabbard's always been a fuckhead. Tulsi Gabbard's always been a fascist. She's always been a piece of shit. She's never been anti-war. She's a literal psyops officer in the army, and then she grifted a bunch of, like, frankly, horny 22-year-old men who were like, oh my god, like, she's hot and she claims to be anti-war. But she's never anti-war. She's never been anti-war. Like, and anyone who likes Tulsi Gabbard, anyone who thought Tulsi Gabbard was ever anti-war or anti-establishment, like, I've got a bridge to sell you. But she did better in the 2020 Dem primary than Kamala did. So? Do you think I'm a Kamala Harris supporter? Or do you think, do I seem, based on anything that I've said in this stream, as someone who would have supported Kamala Harris in the 2020 primary? I was a supporter of voting for the Democratic candidate because at the end of the day, like, one of them was going to be president. And I'm not going to debate this with you because it's clear that you and I are not, you and I are operating in different realities here. But, like, no, I was a supporter of pinching my nose and voting for the Democratic candidate. But, like, I don't like Kamala Harris. I just think Trump was worse, you know? And Tulsi Gabbard is worse as well. I'm not a big fan of Democrats in general. Vote blue no matter who type vibes. Vote against red no matter who is probably the better. But also, like, generally vote for the kind of staffing you find. Vote for pro-union administrations. Vote for antitrust people who regulate monopolies. Vote for the guys that don't, you know, mobilize the army against political protests. Like, Democrats are more ineffective at shutting down protests against and organizing against institutions, which means they're the ones I want in power, right? It's more vote for the enemy that's easier to defeat kind of thing. And also vote against the person who sells false enemies and then uses all of their time and power to transfer wealth directly into the pockets of mega corporations and billionaires. And while Democrats are incredibly corrupt and their entire power structure, as I talked about before, their entire incentive structure revolves around protecting their own careers by doing the work of their donors and making sure that, like, this insider politics, like, power cycle stays perfectly, like, insulated from it to itself. The one thing I will say is that Democrats don't just directly transfer money into the pockets of billionaires. They're more concerned with lining their own pockets, while Republicans are literally just stooges for the oligarchy. And you, like, just look at fucking, like, look at the oligarchic money, like, behind Trump. Like, Elon Musk pumped millions of dollars into a get out the vote effort that was borderline, like, probably kind of illegal, but for the fact that, like, the court is stacked enough in Republicans' favor that they won't rule against him. But, like, he was everything short of literally paying people off to vote for Trump. And, like, including, like, a very clear pro-Trump turnout that was paying people to get other voters registered, which is, in a more civilized version of this country, definitely illegal. So yes, I'm vote blue no matter who. Kamala had a bigger war chest, have way more corporate donors, has spent like 3 times what Trump did. What the Trump campaign did, but the money that was spent outside of the Trump campaign, right? That's the difference. As far as corporate donors go, I'm not totally sure. I wouldn't have trouble believing that. But yes, the Harris campaign spent a lot more money and it went a lot more futile. But I don't know what the point of any of this is. My point is on the merits of the candidates. And the merits of the candidates is just that, like, Republicans will sell you false enemies, and then they will use government to take money that was going to go to you, and then they will put it directly into the pockets of billionaires. That's just what they do, you know? Democrats are just inept at defending those programs, but Republicans want to destroy them, right? Democrats are bad at expanding Medicare and Social Security. Republicans want to privatize it. It's the lesser of two evils, you know? Anyway, back on target, back on topic. It is really important I don't care how much the U.S. government spends per year. I don't care. We print the money. We print the money. What I care about is what the U.S. government spends money on is leading to increased productivity in the country. Well, that will cause wealth inequality? No, it won't. That's not necessarily true. One, fine. We'll hit the stun lock, all right? Because this stream was off the rails anyway. All right. One, the government, as long as the money that is being spent into debt, and you're gonna have to listen to this, because if you filibuster, then it's not gonna be a productive conversation. It's not filibuster, but like if you keep firing off lines, the U.S. government can spend into debt as long as whatever money they are spending translates to a reduction in the cost burden on the economy or an increase in what the economy is able to produce, right? This is the kind of the same principle as a business that perpetually takes on debt, right? If you're a business and you take out a loan and your business becomes successful, the first thing you do is not to pay off the loan. You take on more loans, because what a successful business builds is credit. The ability to say to investors, the ability to say to banks, hey, I borrowed $10,000 and I turned it into $200,000. I don't have to pay back the $10,000. Well, what I would do is I would take out another loan to pay back the $10,000. But like I would take on a bigger loan that pays off the $10,000, but also allows me to further expand my business, right? So businesses will perpetually keep spending into debt, because on the other hand, their productivity is increasing as well. A similar principle applies to the U.S. economy. Of course, we don't always apply it accordingly. If you take money that you have or otherwise could have, and you spend it on things like healthcare, a social safety net, when you put that money into the pocket of working Americans, do you know where that money goes? That money goes straight back into the economy because people need that money to spend it. If you give people $1,500 for childcare, that $1,500 they're saving, that goes to other shit they need. This is why the child tax credit slashed child poverty by 50%. The reason for that is those people were in poverty. They needed shit, and then they were able to buy that shit with the money they suddenly had, right? It stimulates activity in the economy, which in itself pays for itself. Now, that debt doesn't necessarily go away, but it gives us, it keeps things moving, right? And as long as things are moving, we are able to continue doing the same thing, which is spending money, stimulating economic activity. Think of that debt as just a thing that exists. It only has consequences if the thing that it's supposed to be fueling stops, right? As far as the wealth inequality, I'm not sure why you think that will cause wealth inequality unless you're talking about a wealth transfer specifically to extremely wealthy people. there's an easy way to fix wealth inequality, which is taxation, right? Like, what you do is you say, okay, you have $250 million. That is more money than you could hope to spend in your lifetime and that your children could hope to spend in their lifetime. And after that $250 million, congratulations. You have won capitalism, and now every additional dollar that you make, we're going to take, and I'm giving you the very soft lefty version of this. For every dollar you make over those $250 million, we're going to take 75 cents of that. And then we're going to use that to fund a program, fund an employment program, like a universal jobs program. We're going to use that to build roads. We're going to use that to fund healthcare. Like, it doesn't matter, right? I don't think it matters as much what we fund with it. We should probably fund things that are less overtly productive for the economy. Maybe that's a good thing to fund healthcare or Social Security or something. Maybe not Social Security, but like, yeah, maybe Social Security, right? Things that are a safety net that don't necessarily directly produce productivity and growth. That said, I think that like a Medicare for All system, while being the most expensive government program of all time, would also massively slash the cost burden to regular Americans. So that will pay for itself. The government debt will go up, but consumer debt will go down. And then what are those consumers able to do? Spend, baby. Just spend, spend, spend. People who need a universal health insurance program need it because they cannot afford other things in their life. They're drowning in medical debt. Medical debt prevents people from doing things like buying houses, like renting. The debt that the government takes on takes economic burdens off of working people and allows them to be more productive in the economy. That's the function of government debt. So it's not just, oh, the US government spends like $7 trillion a year. That $7 trillion a year largely is in Medicare and Social Security. Wait, hold on. Yes. Social Security, by the way, is completely paid for between the trust fund and its own taxes. So like, you have to take that away from the $7 trillion, because if we're talking about spending less, what we're doing is we're eliminating Social Security. We're not making any more money. All of Social Security is funded directly by itself, right? So it's unfair to use that as an example of government spending when really what it is it's workers paying for their own retirement, right? And if you want to get into a conversation about Social Security, we can do that. But like, so now let's come to Medicare. Medicare can be extremely costly for the government, and it can be putting us into debt. But again, that debt is alleviating medical debt for retired people, but then also like Medicaid and the social safety net, right? So my point is, if we were to expand Medicare and Medicaid so that the government is covering the health costs, Medicaid is growing at like 10% a year and Social Security is growing at like 7%. Okay. Again, I don't care how much the US government spends. If it's spending on things that reduce consumer debt, like if Medicare is growing at 10% a year and Social Security is growing at 7%, that's because living costs are, Social Security is a different issue. If Social Security is growing at 7%, that is because Social Security contributions are growing at 7%. It means that people are doing more work and making more money. It means that people are more productive. The spending that we do on Social Security, or it means that we're spending into the trust fund, which means that the trust fund is going to run out and then Social Security is going to stop growing as fast, right? But the growth of Social Security is completely irrelevant as to the level of government debt. Social Security is not a debt expenditure. Social Security does not cost the government any deficit money because Social Security is funded entirely by FICA. Medicare, I'm not sure if and what there is that is, but like I'm not actually going to argue whether or not Medicare is being funded by deficit spending. But I'm going to defend that Medicare should be funded by deficit spending. Or not Medicare, sorry. That government-run healthcare, that public healthcare for working Americans, right? Maybe Medicare shouldn't be funded by deficit spending because it doesn't translate to productivity, which means Medicare has to be funded by taxes, which it is, right? That's part of what FICA is. Deficit spending monetized by the Federal Reserve will cause asset price inflation. The problem is you're copy pasting out of a macro book when you're not understanding what makes it more nuanced about the way that we spend into deficits. I'm not going to repeat myself about what the difference is between deficit spending that increases productivity in the economy or decreases cost burden on the economy, which in itself increases the ability of people to contribute to the economy. I already explained that. I'm not going to explain it again. If you didn't understand that and you're going to go back to your talking points, then we'll just have to not agree to disagree, but agree that you didn't actually listen to or register anything that I said. My argument is that public health care should spend into deficit because the burden of debt that it reduces, the burden of consumer debt that it removes from American consumers, in itself counteracts what we believe the effect of deficit spending would be. So one second. Yes. Now, I'm talking about a big picture view of the economy, right? That the same people that we are borrowing money from are the same people who benefit from a more productive and less burdened consumer base. Where was I? I just got completely distracted. I've not streamed in many moons. In fact, it's been a little over a year since my last stream. The point here is, the reason that deficit spending has not put us off a fiscal cliff that has been predicted over and over and over and over and over again is that when you spend on building things, those things make things better. And the better stuff pays for itself, you know? You have to understand that, like, economic theory, especially macroeconomic theory, there's a reason that business people say, like, macroeconomics is fake, which they say that playfully because obviously there's a lot of, like, but macroeconomics is the study of patterns that gauge a larger realm of human behavior. Microeconomics is actually it's because you guys have the world's reserve currency and a global debt-based system. The only entities that can print base money in the credit system is the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Yes, that's my point. But it's not. It's a necessary but insufficient facet. The global reserve, like the world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar being the world reserve currency, that's not an unknown fact to literally anyone. But people have continued saying we're going to go off there's going to be like a fiscal time bomb. You can't deficit spend forever. Are you familiar with Triffin's dilemma? I'll humor you in a second, but you can't deficit spend forever, but you can. As long as the dollar remains the global reserve currency, right? But that's not even it. As long as the United States is delivering value, assuming the rest of the world accepts it, the rest of the world does accept it. And even if the dollar ceases, and it's not like the dollar is going to suddenly explode and the renminbi is going to take over as the global reserve currency. That's not how it's going to work. There will be a divestiture from the dollar, right? The dollar is going to die as the global currency because U.S. empire is going to die. U.S. economic hegemony is going to die. That's going to happen. Now, I think the implications of that are going to be far, like, probably far more dire than whatever the implications of the dollar imploding are going to be. But the dollar's not going to just, like, poof, right? Global powers are going to divest from the dollar, not because of the amount of debt that they hold of ours. Global powers are going to divest from the dollar simply because the U.S. economic hegemony is going to fade, right? But I would challenge the notion that there is any significant consequence to the amount of debt owed by the U.S. to the people that hold it. And frankly, I don't think... I'm trying to think if I've... Because when I speak to people in finance, like, the reason they argue against deficits... Well, quite frankly, the reason they argue against deficits is that they think that government spending is a waste of money. They think that government programs are a waste of money, right? But I've actually never heard someone say to me that they think that the amount of debt that the U.S. government has is a bad thing. They say it on media. They say it on Fox News. They say it on CNBC. But that's all rhetoric. It's all pablum. I don't think I've ever heard, like, in any debate with a fiscal conservative, I don't think I've ever heard a fiscal conservative say that U.S. debt is an actual problem. I mean, like, or quantify that, right? They'll say, like, oh yeah, no, it's a U.S. debt's a problem, but, like, they don't actually quantify it, and they never, like, defend the argument. I don't know. I haven't heard and even in arguments where I've, like, taken on, like, the financial sector, like, I've steelmanned the financial sector argument. Like, I've been told, oh no, that's not why. That's not actually a significant problem. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of my macro I don't remember, but the main reason I don't remember a decent amount of my macro is that, like, I've come to believe it's not necessarily a problem until you need the Federal Reserve to artificially lower rates with a decade plus of quantitative easing. And the interest payments start to blow up. So everything I've heard from people in finance is that the crowding out effect in that that quantitative easing has nothing to do with deficit spending. And more of the tax revenues go to interest. That you're gonna have to show me literature on that. Yeah, I can't have a conversation. I can't have, like, a detailed debate about money markets with you because, frankly, I don't remember my macro. But, like, yeah, I've, like, the last time I talked to someone in a hedge fund about crowding out, I came away with the impression that it's kind of a fake concept. Look at the interest this year; it's more than defense spending. I understand that the Federal Reserve's relationship with the interest rate is a problem, but there's, like, a deeper, I think a huge portion of that is the a deeply flawed economic stimulus in 2009 kind of set off a really, really bad monetary policy. Like, what's it called? It was like a landslide of bad monetary policy. That, like, yeah, it wasn't a precedent. Precedent is about a principle. What happens when you lower interest rates is that you have to keep lowering interest rates because you cannot. The moment you raise interest rates, what you're doing is you are, like, what you're doing is you're stymieing activity in the money markets, right? Which is really bad. But eventually you have to do it, because the alternative is the lower interest rates get, the more people just start holding on to their money, right? Like, holding rates go through the roof. And this was a problem following the 2008 crisis. That, like, I'm trying to be very careful about, like, conflating different things, but, like, I know one of the biggest problems that limited the economic recovery in 2009 was that, like, financial institutions, if I remember correctly, financial institutions were not lending. But the problem is that, like, there's no way out of that problem, because you're directly counteracting, like, the willingness, the proclivity to lend money. But it's the only way you can actually get people to spend into debt, is to lower interest rates, right? So you need business owners to be able to start up businesses. You need people to finance, like, various, like, ventures they have. So in order to get businesses to, like, continue working, no one knew who was holding the toxic assets, and the counterparty risk went through the roof. Again, like, I don't want to get super into, like, the weeds of, and this is exactly how finance works, is that, like, it makes everything a super specialized, extremely hyper nuanced topic, which, like, I don't know what section of the economic collapse we're talking about, right? But the truth is, like, on a bigger picture, in the bigger picture, like, the problem with endlessly lowering interest rates is that people aren't going to lend money, right? People are going to save it. Or not save it, but, like, people are going to, banks aren't going to lend money, which means people aren't going to spend money, because they're not going to be borrowing, you know? But the way to get people to borrow more money is to lower interest rates. So it's like, and there's, and then what happens is, when inflation is through the roof, is what you do is you have to raise interest rates to get people to stop spending. But I don't think that was because of deficit. Like, that was because of interests were raised to control consumer spending, right? And I don't think the Federal Reserve was perpetually lowering interest rates because of deficit spending. I think the Federal Reserve was perpetually lowering interest rates because, frankly, that's the only thing you can do until inflation goes through the roof. Because if you do it before then, what you're doing is you're just engineering a recession. At least that's what I came away from the last conversation I had about this stuff with. But I don't think there's actually a significant relationship between government deficit spending and reserve rates. Not that there's not a significant, it's just I think it's massively overblown. At least that's the impression I've gotten. All right, let's look up this Triffin's dilemma, which, by the way, I am probably going to scoff at it. Is the conflict of economic interest that arises between short-term domestic and long-term international objectives for countries whose currencies serve as global reserve currencies. He noted that a country so the Federal Reserve could sell their $7 trillion in assets with zero effect. When did I ever say that? And why would they? Debt is also power, right? Like, I could give you a platitude right now about like if you owe someone $100, they have actually I'm gonna say it. If you owe someone $100, they have power over you. If you owe someone $1 billion, you have power over them. You ever heard that? Like that is an important. There's a principle behind that, right? No, why would we sell our debt? People who hold our debt have a vested interest in the survival of the United States until they find a way to divest from the U.S. as a global reserve currency, which would take a level of international economic coordination that's never been seen before. And it would take a catastrophic event. It would take a catastrophic event to get global economic powers to divest like that. Or just a suitable alternative, like, BRICS, but like bigger, a lot bigger. And that is not apparent to me that exists, or will for a decently long time. Because it artificially lowers the rates of that. Lowering the rates causes the prices to go up. Why should current asset holders get the benefit of a total? Because it artificially lowers the rates of that. Lowering the rates causes the prices go up. I need you to rephrase that. I'm not sure what we're talking about. You have to understand, I'm not an economist. And I don't have respect for people who are. No, I'm kidding. Well, a little bit. I think economists massively overvalue the ability of their field to adequately measure the realities that they claim that it measures. The supply function is nominally accomplished by international trade, with the country holding an inevitable trade deficit. Yeah. But this talks about a long run that, quite simply, in which everyone's dead. When the Federal Reserve buys mortgage bonds, for example, it sends the rates down and the prices up for real estate. I have to think about that for a second. When the Federal Reserve buys mortgage bonds, sends the rates down and the prices up for real estate. Are mortgage bonds a significant part of quantitative easing? I genuinely don't know. But again, like, I don't need to. I actually don't need to like get into the nitty gritty on this. I want to read more on this. They've got like $3 trillion in mortgage-backed securities. Okay. So I don't need to get into this because, again, I don't work in finance. I'm not an economist. So when someone really smart who works in finance tells me that like the crowding out effect is overstated, I believe them. That's it. I'm not going to risk misunderstanding an economic concept and shaping something on top of it. Problems with the role of the U.S. dollar. So, I think that Triffin. So, like this dilemma, you know what? It reminds me of Zeno's paradox, which talks about how Zeno's paradox is the idea that, say, a tortoise and a hare are racing, right? Where am I? Okay, a tortoise and a hare are racing, and the hare gives the tortoise like a 5-minute head start, and the tortoise slowly inches forward. Now the hare is way faster, and it starts, but wherever the tortoise is, by the time the hare gets to where the tortoise was, the tortoise has already gone somewhere else because the tortoise is moving at a non-zero speed. So by Zeno's paradox, you physically, if you start off in a race behind someone, it is physically impossible, cosmically impossible to actually overtake them, because no matter what, as long as that person keeps moving, by the time you catch up to where they were when you started moving, they will be somewhere else, and by the time you catch up to that place, they will be further forward, and by the time you catch up to where they are then, they'll be further forward. Now, what the flaw with this paradox is that you are viewing things through the wrong frame of reference. At least in terms of like, it's not wrong frame of reference. You're viewing things through a different frame of reference. And the frame of reference is relative displacement, relative position. When the frame you should be viewing it through, for a practical equation, is time, right? When you look at it through relative displacement, time becomes asymptotic. It just like keeps dipping off and regressive and regressive. And time goes slower and slower and slower and slower until it's going infinitely slow to the point of infinity, right? So you get to a point where, hold on, let me finish my point. So because you're viewing things through the wrong frame, you're viewing the problem as different than what it should be, right? I think that's a similar problem to talking about a global reserve currency relying on infinitely expanding debt. Because, like, ultimately, you're not looking at what has to take place for that fiscal time bomb to go off. There's an immense amount of, like, there's an immense amount of power held in that debt, and for that power to go away, there has to be, like, a series of, like, really consequential things to happen. Including a viable alternative global reserve currency, or a situation so dire that countries will divest and financial actors will divest without a viable alternative. Which also is not evidence. There's no evidence of a situation that dire that would happen. That's why I think government juicing asset prices is wrong, because only the current asset holders are going to benefit. No one else will be able to catch up. I don't understand what that means, and I don't want to get into the weeds about it. It sounds like you are talking about something that is not quite what I'm talking about. It's not to say that what you're talking about is irrelevant, but one of the things, the criticisms I have of the way the economic system works and the way the financial system works, is that it prides itself on being so esoteric that people give up trying to understand the broader pictures. And that's not something I want to play into. And this is, by the way, this is how fiscal conservatives win arguments, is that, like, guys with MBAs who spend their entire lives being able to understand finance at a great breadth in a field that keeps itself incredibly complicated in order to, like, gatekeep on basic participation in our own political reenfranchisement. I absolutely 100% believe that our financial system is more complicated than it needs to be, specifically in order to maintain an elitism to it. And that's, I will make a disclaimer. I don't think that's because what was I going to say? Shit. That's not because I can give you a more viable capitalistic financial system. But no, I don't think that the system itself is overcomplicated. I think that the understanding of it is kept extremely esoteric. It's actually quite easy to understand, but most people put all their time into deep cultural social thoughts than economic. It is quite easy to understand on a broader level. But I think if you're finding economics too easy to understand, it's because you're oversimplifying it. People are extremely complicated, and you can't perfectly predict. I think a couple of basic rules that you have to engage with are microeconomics is very simple, and also a decent predictor of behavior. Macroeconomics is, frankly, a slightly more empirically sound version, not slightly, a fairly more empirically sound version of astrology, which is basically to say that it studies patterns and can be useful in helping to predict future outcomes, but you cannot model what is going to happen and know with great certainty that it's going to happen the same way that you can with microeconomics, because you're taking a series of small picture observations and you're using them to make big picture predictions that are, quite frankly, not borne out, that have not been studied as things that have happened, you know? So you're taking an aggregation of microeconomic outcomes that have resulted in this macro outcome in this point in this past. But the inability to historicize, the inability to understand global and historical events through the lens of history at the behest of understanding them through the lens of macroeconomics is a disservice to being able to understand why things happen, what will continue to happen, and how to change the outcomes. So cultural and social conversations are important because they implicate the economic outcomes, and the economic outcomes implicate them. And our understanding of the culture implicates what frames that we're engaging with on the economics, right? The political economy is really is influenced by the culture, and the culture is influenced by the political economy. These things are all integral and connected. And economics, like as a basic idea, accounts for this, but doesn't actually always do the work. The field doesn't always do the work. Sure, but you focus too much on that and you will end up being an economic slave. It sounds like you're trying to get me to invest in the stock market. It sounds like you have a 12-step plan to making a killing in the stock market, which my ears are open. Most people understand more about the Kardashians than the Federal Reserve. Yeah, because the Kardashians are interesting and entertaining. The Federal Reserve is interesting to me because I'm a nerd. It's how they allocate their gray matter, lol. And also the Federal Reserve is stressful. The Kardashians are not stressful. They're a stress reducer. You get to think about, and also, who the fuck is talking about the Kardashians now, man? Like, reality TV is a stress reducer. It allows you to forget about your problems while thinking about somebody else's problems. Understanding the Federal Reserve is basically me saying, like, let's think more about why my life is fucked. And let's think about all the ways that I have no influence to change it while still thinking about the ways in which it is fucked. It's a dysfunctional level of political engagement. You're not going to get people to understand the Federal Reserve. You're not going to get people to understand economics. You can get people to understand that their empathy is more important than finding a false enemy for their problems. I know, I try. It's wasted effort. I think the best thing you can do is develop a wide and holistic understanding of economics, not just economics, but of political economy, of society at large. Not over-focus on economic minutia, not over-focus on your technical... developing a technical understanding of macroeconomics is cool and it's interesting, and we need people who understand who specialize in all of these things. Like, we need people who wonk on certain things. I used to be very, very into, like, understanding healthcare systems, right? Because I wanted that to be my issue. And then, like, it wasn't happening because I have lived the past 3 years below the poverty line. So, like, I'm working, I'm being an artist, whatever. I didn't have time to. But, like, it's important to understand what the problems are and how the wrong people are lying to you about it. And that's all Trump does, is he identifies what the core problem is and then lies to your face about whom to blame, and does it with such confidence that you think, oh, well, you know, this is the guy who's telling me who the bad guy is, and the other person is not telling me who the bad guy is. Because the real answer is a little complicated, right? Now, I think that Democrats should lie more. You know, I think not lie, but like, yeah, if a system is rotten, even if the even if the people who benefit from it, like, are not demons, I would rather turn the ire against our broken political system, against the people who benefit from that political system, and actively seek to stop change against it, which is what the ruling class does, which is what the billionaire ruling class does. That's what billionaires should do, right? They act in their best self-interest. This is a basic principle of economics, is that economic actors act in their best self-interest. But like, yes, I would rather we paint Jeff Bezos as a demon than a fucking undocumented immigrant who works a job no one else wants to do and is just afraid of being deported and has absolutely no access to, like, to fuck all. Anyway, that was not the intended topic of my stream, but I have to go to bed because I have to be up tomorrow for work. Cool. We'll get into Nancy Mace another day. We'll get into the cowardice of the Democratic Party, the complete unwillingness to take a stand on defending trans people, who are, frankly, the most physically and materially threatened demographic, except for working class immigrants. I think working class immigrants, the urban poor, and transgender people are like the most physically at-risk groups. And the unwillingness of Democrats to take a stand against a demonic level, a pure evil level of transphobia coming from a congressperson named Nancy Mace is extremely discouraging. It's blithely disgusting. And is liable to lose us elections that we don't need to lose. Because I think ultimately voters are much more likely to vote for a Democratic Party they disagree with than with a Democratic Party that is spineless. That's what I meant to get to today, but every stream gets side-railed, and usually by interesting conversations, so I don't regret it. All right, well, peace. I will be back later. Drop a follow if you enjoy the conversation and want to have more again. Otherwise, I wish you luck. Hey, thanks for the follow, Nato Bud. All right, have a good night.